Yeah, hi team, this is Ashwin, and I'm here for talking about the new tool that I've created that is helping you to onboard Microsoft Sentinel. It's more like a planner tool. Now, those who doesn't know what is Sentinel, I would like to give you a brief about that. Microsoft Sentinel is basically an SIEM or an SOAR solutioning from Microsoft, and it basically delivers all intelligence security analytics and the threat intelligence capabilities across the enterprise organizations. Now, it's basically a single solution that can basically help you detect attack, give you visibility to all the threats that you have. You can basically proactively perform threat hunting and do a response to all the threats that is actually detected. So Microsoft Sentinel is basically a bird's eye view to your entire organization. And to make it actually better to manage, Microsoft has documented the ways you can basically do that project. It starts with collection, basically collecting all the data from your users, devices, applications, and infrastructure. It can be on-premise as well as cloud. Basically, when you say cloud, it doesn't just necessarily need to be Azure. It can be any cloud. Now, once you have the data collected, you have the visibility possibilities of visibility to your organization. What you do is you enter basically going through a detect phase wherein you basically use Microsoft Analytical's engine and the threat intelligence capabilities. Once it detects certain things, you have an option to investigate, and you can even respond to some of them using any kind of automation as well. So that's the four different parts of all four different milestones in your project in terms of managing Sentinel. So once you have a Sentinel deployed, you basically will have an understanding. You will basically able to look at your organization from a MITRE ATT&CK perspective, and as just an example or a demo instance running on my Azure subscription. So we talked enough about Sentinel. We need to know more about Sentinel. I would prefer you go through these documentations, learn further about that. And also there is another document made in collaboration with Microsoft by Bluepoint. You can basically have a look at that. That's going to give you a lot more detailing. So I've been referring to all of these content to create this particular planner tool. So yeah, coming to the reason why we have this video. So this is basically the planner tool, and what you have to do is you basically start with a new planner and you click on proceed, and you basically will get an understanding of the tool in the beginning, why this tool exists, and then basically the different milestones that are present in that particular tool. Now, if you see in this Microsoft, it starts with collection, but we all know that not many organizations start that way. So I've basically added three phases. That is basically assessment, discovery, remediation, and then we talk about collection, detection, investigate, response, and then I basically added a response automation. Response can be a manual response to the incident, and the response automation is where you basically do any kind of playbook integrations and things like that. Just like any other tools that I've made, starts with an initial configuration where you need to put your team details, what technologies you have in your organization, what are the device detail. Just to let you know that I'm working on certain updates to this tool wherein I can have more control on the scheduling part and things like that. I'll talk about that when we speak about a demo project plan. Now, if you go into the milestone part, you basically have the same milestones that you show or you saw in the milestone section in the introduction, and you basically can start with assessment. And if you can actually see here, it's more or less based on the NIST framework. So basically, NIST framework talks about the different functions like identity, protection, detection, response, and recovery. And basically, when you look into each of them, you basically have an options to add up to 15 controls inside it. And whenever you add a control, you basically can put a description to the control. You can put which phase does it belong to, And then you basically select a phase and you select a group underneath that, and you select what is the status of that, whether it's a master or not. Master means you can actually link another control to that. So whenever you change the status of the master control, it automatically updates on all of that linked controls. And then you basically can schedule it. So you put a date, and then you basically, it automatically calculates the days. Now this is what I said. I'm actually working on an update to this particular tool, wherein I will be able to do a lot more scheduling options. Like I will be able to select what are my working days, like Monday to Friday, or is it Sunday to Thursday, and things like that, or if you have any holidays coming in between. So you should have an option to do that in this tool shortly. And the other updates that's coming up is wherein there will be a dependency tracker on the control. Like say, for example, you added multiple controls, and you might say that control 2 is dependent on the completion of control 1. So it's basically a finish to start dependency. So it is going to have a start to start dependency, finish to start dependency, and it's going to basically have a finish to finish dependency. Basically, the end date has to be same and things like that. So all of that typical dependencies you find in any project management tool. Now, once you have done with all of that, you have added all the controls needed, and then you actually can go through each of the phase, you complete that activity, and then you can actually download the project plan and things like that. So for the sake of actually getting through the whole process, I'm going to actually upload a demo project plan, generally something that I use with most of my engagements. And so if you go into that, and if I go to the milestones, now it actually shows me certain things. So you might actually see earlier there was many more functions here. One reason the other function doesn't exist is because this project plan only talks about identification in the assessment. What are we trying to do? We basically schedule an introduction meeting. We get a awareness discussion around Security Operations Center, Microsoft Sentinel, attack metrics, an ISD framework, and then we develop a defense in-depth strategy. And then we identify all the defense in-depth technologies that are deployed, whether they are deployed with the best practices and all of that. And then you get into the discovery part. That's where you try to discover your log source, what are the type of log sources that you have identified, what connector requirements do you have. We identify whether you have a landing zone deployed, whether you basically have a log generation calculations done. So this is basically the other tool that we have. So if you go into the tool section, you can find the tool which actually helps you to do calculations and all of that. And then that's going to give you an understanding on what kind of usage it is. And the next is basically, if you already have Sentinel deployed, just make sure that you have the Sentinel deployed with the right configurations. And even for that, there is a tool available. So if you go to the tool sections, you can go into the Security Baseliner Sentinel Edition. That's basically going to let you ensure that you can track your Sentinel deployment is done based on a particular best practices. And then you complete that activity, you identify the planning requirements, you discuss all the use case processes that is needed. Now, we are not discussing the use case here, we're talking about processes involved, and then we can probably have all of the talking about the use cases getting deployed and things like that. And then get to the remediation part. This is where you probably need to look at whether the availability of resources are there, whether you have the required approvals for the project, and whether you have finalized all the architectural requirements or the planning or considerations involved in it. And then you basically can get to the scenario where you ensure all the log sources have the right timestamp, you have the right logging level, you have the required bandwidth in your internet, and then you basically have all the required approvals needed. Then you basically ensure that you have a complete architectural planning and considerations. And once that is done, then you basically ensure that you make all the changes needed onto your routing and the firewall rules, create the permissions needed in your Active Directory or Azure AD, and once that is there, you deploy all the Azure resources needed for the Sentinel to be deployed. Once that is done, yeah, that's where you start with the collection. So you basically come back to the document which talks about the collection. So we have prepared everything required for getting to the collection. Collection is generally the detect function. So you basically onboard them, you deploy the MMA, or you basically deploy the Azure monitoring agent. Okay, so that's typically one of the errors. So you can actually, it's Azure monitoring agent. So it is AMA instead. So it's actually looking at, whether you deploy the MMA or whether you deploy the Azure monitoring agent. You can actually find that it's not updated here, because if you refresh the data and if you expand it, you will find that the data is updated here as well. And then we talk about the deployment of the syslog collector, and then making sure you configure all the required data connectors available. When then get into the detection part of things, or this is basically the detection the phase wherein you enable all the analytical rules, different multi-state attack detections. You basically configure the threat intelligence, create all the watch list that is needed. You configure this watch list in your search, and then you basically have all the threat hunting capabilities involved. You basically have a proper UEBA enabled. Once the detection phase is done, you get into the investigation part. That's where you ensure you have a plan in place. You have bookmarked all the important response capabilities. You configure the notebooks. You can basically ensure that you have all the dashboards enabled. Basically, it's called workbooks in our system. And then you can even create monitor workbooks to basically visualize your data. Once that is basically done, then you get into the response part of that, where you talk about working with the incident, how you can connect it with your ITSM, how you can work with large set of data, and how you can work with the archive data. All of that is basically planned, and all of the requirements are on collaboration with Microsoft Teams. And then talking about automation is basically looking at the playbook, how you can make the authentication, what are the different triggers that you can configure, how you can create a built-in template, or you can basically customize it. And then basically once that is done, then you create an automation rule and trigger these playbooks. Now once these are actually done, then if you go into the next stage, you basically have a kind of update, where you start, because there is no update done to any of these tasks. That's why it's actually 0%. Target is like at least you should be 60%. But this is something that will eventually happen as you work with it. So once you do an export, it's going to export you the whatever files, whatever changes that we did, because I made some changes in terms of the name and all of that. And if you want to actually download the project plan, just like any other tool, you can do that as well. Once it is downloaded, it basically shows you the project plan. So I went to the other screen. Just a moment, please. So that's basically the project plan. Tells you everything about it, whatever you discussed and on that. And as I basically mentioned, it lets you know even which resources are utilized once you have the initial configuration sorted out and all that. And it will have better scheduling mechanism in the upcoming update. It's going to come shortly in the system. Once that is there, then I'm going to make an updated video telling about that as well. All right. I believe this video was helpful to understand how you can plan your Sentinel instance, and I'm going to put the URL to this particular tool in the description of this video, and then you can look after your Sentinel deployment in the best possible way. And another part is, this is based on my experience, and you can think about it this way. You using this tool, you kind of is actually putting a lot of experience that has come from me, or you can say that a Microsoft MVP involvement in your system. Ping me on my LinkedIn if you have any questions, any suggestions that you have on this particular tool. Please let me know. I'll be happy to incorporate that. So thank you, and have a nice day.